Well, good day from coast to coast, and welcome to the IAP2
The
Canada
broadcast is now
Professional
starting. All
Certification
attendees are
Program.
in listen-only mode.
Yes, and as the lovely lady was saying, everybody is in listen-only mode right now. Good day from coast to coast. I'm Drew Snyder with IAP2 Canada, and welcome to this special webinar on the IAP2 Canada Professional Certification Program. We will start the webinar proper in just a moment. Let me just run through a couple of things for you before we get going. This is being recorded, so if you need to go back and hear something, and also for those who, for one reason or another, are not able to take part, they can also listen in at a later time. And we'll have that link posted on the IAP2 Canada website once this thing is finished with. The other thing is, this is going to be interactive. This will be an opportunity for you to ask questions. Brenda and Gay will be giving their presentation. Afterwards, we'll have a question period. And there are two ways you can do that. You can go into the question chat box and type in your question, or you can click that little yellow hand icon that you see there on your control panel, and I will open your microphone and you can ask the question yourself. We're going to keep everybody muted on your mics until it's your turn to talk, and as you probably see, you're already muted as it is. And so we'll do that. If you have a really burning question too, let me know in the question box and I'll be able to break in to Brenda and Gay, but for the most part, we'll start with the presentation and then we'll go to the questions. So let's get started right away and bring aboard, first of all, from the Certification Task Force. Both Brenda and Gay are with the Canadian Certification Task Force. Brenda Pichette. Brenda.
Hello, everybody. Drew, you were just a little fading in and out there a little bit on your voice, so I don't know if you need to just do a little check on something, but you did kind of wah out a little bit there.
I wonder if that happened for anybody else, but if I need to repeat anything, please ask. Anyway, it's all yours.
Yes. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for participating in this webinar today. Just by means of a little introduction, I have chaired the Canadian Certification Task Force, and we started up in January 2016. So we've been at it for over a year now. I am also a member of the IAP2 USA Task Force that actually convened in November 2013, and I actually kind of shudder when I look at that date, think of how long we've been working on this program and you know, putting in the time to build a really good certification program for IAP2. I'm currently sitting on the Canada board, and I have been a member for IAP2 for probably about 10 years, and I hail from Ottawa these days. So Gay, do you just want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Gay Robinson here. I'm also a member of the Canadian Certification Task Force and have been since the beginning. It's been a really great experience for me, and I'm looking forward to the next round of certification. In addition to being on the task force, I serve on the board of the IAP2 Wild Rose chapter, and I've been an IAP2 member for about 15 plus years. I've lost track. I live in Calgary, and I am an IAP2 licensed trainer for the Foundations program as well.
Thanks, Gay. We are just absolutely delighted to announce, as all of you know, that we are going to host an assessment center in June here in Canada, and we're going to wait and see where our applicants hail from before we decide on what exact location. The U.S. team hosted a pilot for the program in 2015. They linked it with the North American Conference in September of 2015. And we did a pilot session here in Canada in November, just this past November 2016, and there has just been so many lessons learned, and we are intending that the lessons will continue, and we will continue to revise the program and get it to its very best state for our practice. So next slide, Drew. So today what we're going to do is I'm just going to give you a little bit of a brief history on where we're coming from. We're going to talk about an overview of the program, talk about, of course, this pilot session that we're getting up and running. We're going to walk you through the core competencies, which are the base of the certification program. And then Gay's going to spend the bulk of the presentation walking you through the application, because it is a detailed application, and we just want to make sure that you are really clear on what it is we need in that application. So I will pass it over to Gay at that point. Then we're going to just let you know some key dates of the process, and I'm happy to take any questions, but unless, as Drew said, unless it's a really burning question, if we can wait till the end, that would be just great. Next slide. You're ahead of me here. Certification versus certificate. If there's one thing that has really motivated us to move ahead with a formal certification process, is that we have people around North America and perhaps around the world saying that they are certified by IAP2. And they are not certified, they hold a certificate. So many people have confused that word, certificate, with certification, and the IAP2 certificate program, which is what it was called in the past, we've now changed the name to call it the Foundations Program, and it is not the same as being certified. To date, there has been no formal assessment attached to that 5 days of training. So to become certified, you have to confirm that the participants have the ability to apply the knowledge and skills covered in the training, and that just has not been the case. Also, the Foundations program cannot cover all the essential competencies in one short week. So fundamentally, certification requires successful completion of a formal assessment program to confirm an individual's knowledge and skills. Certification is a credential that is bestowed on an individual who can demonstrate that they have the essential competencies necessary for a profession. It often requires completion of specified courses, passing an exam or an assessment center by an independent panel. So the certification process for IAP2 will employ all of these things. Certification is not accreditation, it's not licensing. Those processes are something different. Let me just give you a bit of background on the certification work. With the blessings of the IAP2 Federation, IAP2 USA developed started a process to develop a certification program, and they invited folks from around the world to join in, and indeed Canada moved ahead and said we wanted to be at the table, as did Southern Africa. To accomplish the work, the USA Board of Directors convened that task force to develop full recommendations for a program. So the folks from the U.S. task force, and I just want to give them a call out, and maybe some of them are on the call. As I said, we've been at it for many years at this point, and Wendy Greenlow has chaired the task force, and she is just outside of, she's in Loveland, Colorado now. Deborah Doers in Scottsdale, Arizona. Tina Jesselbrecht, I always say her name wrong, Austin, Texas. Cassie Hemphill is in Missoula. Hannah Letzenberg is in Seattle, and me, and then Ken Smith from South Africa. So we certainly learned a lot during all of these years of working to put the program together. But the U.S. did run a pilot in 2015. We knew after that pilot that we definitely wanted to bring the program to Canada, and so we, started the task force, as I said, in January 2016. The intent with the work of the U.S. team was to design something that could be used by other affiliates around the globe. And we knew from our involvement that it was really just a few things that we needed to add to make sure this was going to work for us in the Canadian context. And one of those things, of course, was, you know, our commitment to working with Indigenous peoples. So the brave souls who joined the Canadian task force are Jan Bloomfield, Gay, Nikki Anderson, who is in Alberta, Natalie Hino, who is in Ontario, and Chantel Barton, who is here in Ottawa with me. So what else did I want to tell you about them? Oh, and of course we've been staffed by Amelia Shaw and Jennifer. So lots of years of work, 2 pilot programs under our belt, and we continue to make changes. We're going to move to the next slide, Drew. And we have the program overview at this point is we've got the certified public participation professional. There are 5 core competencies, and with the 5 core competencies we have attached 31 criteria that we will be assessing. To move ahead and apply, you must have a prerequisite of having done the 5-day foundations program. So we've got a 3-step assessment process, and I think most of you have probably read things on the website and have a pretty good sense of what this is all about. But on the next slide, Drew, we have set up the Pilot Assessment Center. We have opened applications as of the 14th. Those applications will close as of March 16th. We will be running the CP3 level, and as I said, you know, when we see where our applicants come from, then we'll decide where in Canada we're gonna host the actual assessment center. So the next slide, I'll just really quickly, because I'm pretty sure, as I said, you've gone through all of this on the website. 5 core competencies. The competencies were developed on member input. We did 2 large consultations to ask members what is it that people need to, what skills and knowledge do people need to do this kind of work. So we came up with 5 core competencies. The process, planning, and application. These are the skills needed to design and conduct a P2 program. P2 event planning and implementation. These are the skills needed to design and implement a specific event within an overall program. Appropriate use of techniques. These are the skills to choose and use the right techniques that are well suited to events objectives. P2 communication skills. These are the communication skills needed to effectively communicate. And the P2 people skills. So these are the people skills we need that are needed by our profession. So as I said, specific criteria have been identified for each competency, and we have a total of 31 criteria. To receive a CP3 designation, you must be successful at all 31 criteria. So here is the core competencies document, and I'd just like to sort of walk you through an example of what we mean by the core competency and the associated criteria. So here's an example of the first competency is the P2 process planning and application. Core competency is all about the skills we need to plan, as I said. So the first criteria is the ability to work with a project sponsor to understand the decision to be made. So we've set this document to cover all of the competencies, all of the criteria. We've identified in those first 3 columns where the assessors are going to be looking to score those criteria. We've given you a quality standard in the next column over, and then in that last column is, if you are not ready to move ahead, where are you at with that particular skill. So I'll just give you a sec to kind of digest some of that. So the 3-step certification process, you're going to submit a very detailed application and a portfolio. You're going to prepare a response to a case study, and then you are going to participate in an assessment center. And as I pointed out in the core competencies document, we've identified where we're going to be able to assess all of those criteria in any one of these 3 steps. Gay, do you want to take it from here and drill down on the application for folks?
Okay, so Drew, if you can move us to the next slide, please. So this is just a overview of the application, which is the first step in the certification process. And the application is designed to gather evidence of 20 of those 31 criteria that you need for a CP3. Part 1 of the application is some background contact information. In Part 2, you have an opportunity to demonstrate the breadth of techniques you have used, and this is done through a form that you complete. Part 3 gathers information about your professional experience and knowledge, and that's done through project examples and questions. And Part 4 is the portfolio, which is your opportunity to provide additional evidence that you meet the criteria for certification. As you're filling out your application, it's really important to keep in mind that what criteria you're trying to provide evidence of. Having worked through the assessment process last time, I was really grateful of those candidates that made it clear. This, my response relates to criteria 3.1 or something like that. So don't make the assessors guess what you're trying to demonstrate. Really be as clear as possible in your application as to what you're providing evidence of. It's also important in your application to use clear and concise writing, because it's actually one of the ways which we assess criteria 4.4, which is communicate effectively in writing. So the writing in the application is actually taken into account as part of the assessment process. Next slide, Drew. Okay, so Part 1 is pretty simple. It'll be the easiest part of the application. It's really giving some background on you, your contact information, your membership status in IAP2 Canada. So you must be a member in order to apply for certification. You must also have completed your IAP2 training, as Brenda indicated. You either completed the old certificate program, which had 3 modules, or the new foundations program, which has 2 modules. And if you don't remember all the details of when and where you took your training, there's probably a way we can help you find that out through IAP2 Federation, or if you remember your trainer, find out from your trainer. The next thing that's required is a resume, and this can be short. It doesn't have to be a great long document. In fact, we'd appreciate it if it wasn't. So a couple of pages is fine. We don't want to have something that's 4, 5, 6 pages long. The next thing we want from you is an explanation as to why you are seeking certification. Now, this is not assessed. This is just background information for our internal use, for us to understand why people are doing the certification process. The last part of Part 1, or last section of Part 1, is references. So we're looking for 3 people who can attest to your professional knowledge and skills, and they can be clients, they can be supervisors, they can be colleagues, but it must be able to speak to your specific capabilities related to the core competencies. So maybe include different references that can speak to different aspects of your experience. Next slide, Drew. Okay, so this is just the top level of the P2 techniques chart, which is what part 2 is all about. And it goes directly to core competence 3, which is appropriate use of P2 techniques. And 3.1 is showing that you can use a diverse P2 techniques at different levels of the spectrum. So you need at least 15 techniques on 3 different levels in order to get your CP3. This shouldn't be difficult because a lot of the techniques are pretty simple techniques. So something like a briefing, as is indicated on the screen, or things like websites, newsletters, feedback forms, questionnaires, open houses, workshops, they're all in the list. So it shouldn't be difficult for you to show that you have done 15 techniques. And also, because you can include techniques at the inform and consult level, again, you don't have to have done great collaborative processes or consensus decision-making type things in order to cover off 3 levels. So in the form, you want to put the project name in the first column, what your role was in designing the event. So in other words, did you design the event? Did you implement it? Did you co-facilitate it? What was your involvement in that particular technique? And then finally, what is the level on the spectrum that the technique was conducted at? And here's one of the stumbling blocks we found from before. It's not the level on the spectrum of the overall project. It's the level on the spectrum of the specific technique. And this is really important. So as an example, a briefing is not at the collaborate level. A briefing is usually done at the inform or the consult level. So you want to make sure that you've positioned the right technique or the right level for the technique. And if you're not sure about a technique or the name's not familiar to you, like a resident feedback register or a response summary, go to your techniques manual. They are all in the manual, and it gives a description so you can refresh your memory as to what they are, and then you can give some thought as to what level they were used at and if they were used appropriately. There's also a section on the form for you to include techniques that are not in our list, because as we all know, things are evolving and changing, and sometimes techniques are hybrids of other techniques. So as long as you can provide a good description of the purpose for the technique and how it was implemented, you can use that, and there's a small space on the application for you to provide that information. If you need more than the little tiny box, the box will expand to fit that information in it. Next slide, Drew. So when we go into part 3, this is the project descriptions and questions, and this is the biggest part of the application and the part that will take the most time for you to complete. Part 3A is about project descriptions, and you need 3 of them. And I would suggest you give really careful thought to the ones you select, because the projects that you select for section 3A has to be used to answer questions for both 3A and 3B. And so you want to make sure you pick projects that highlight different aspects of your experience, and you want to think about all the criteria that need to be covered in 3A and 3B, and ensure that those techniques that you're using as your examples will help you cover off and give really good evidence of your skills related to those different criteria. Next slide, Drew. So here's a little bit of information. This is a screenshot of the actual application. So it's got a little bit of background information. And, you know, don't worry too much if you don't have the budget information. That's optional. It helps to give us context. But we want a bit of a brief description of your project and what your role was in that project. And then we want you to talk about the P2 objectives. And this addresses criteria 1.2, which is establishing objectives for involving the public and with the selected, in line with the selected level and the decision-making process. And if you have examples of SMART objectives, those are always wonderful to have, but we're really focusing on understanding what your objectives were and how you came up with those objectives. The next part is about the level on the spectrum, why you chose it, and how you chose it. And this is addressing 1.4 in the criteria, which is suggest an appropriate level and then support that level selection. And you want to be able to talk in there about how did you work with the client or sponsor to select the level. So did you select it, or did, you know, was there a dialogue with the client around that? You know, how did you end up with that level? And lastly, we want you to describe some of the techniques and communication materials that were used in the project. And you're looking at here to show how you use diverse techniques, to show that the techniques were appropriate for the objectives, that the techniques were appropriate for the needs of the stakeholders and the situation, and how you identified the need for diverse communications materials for diverse audiences. So on the sheet here, the numbers that are in parentheses at the end of the questions, those are the specific criteria that you want to be able to address in your project description and those questions. Next slide, Drew. So you've provided your 3 project descriptions, and now the next 2 sections, part 3B and 3C, are additional questions designed to gather additional evidence of your skills and knowledge. The questions in 3B relate to the project descriptions that you gave in 3A, and so it's important that you keep these questions in mind when you're picking the projects for Part A, and you also want to keep in mind that you're going to be answering these questions later on when you're writing your descriptions of your projects, because you only get 1 page for your project descriptions. And so you want to make sure you're making the best use of space and saving some things for this section B. If you need additional project descriptions in order to answer the 3B questions, that's fine. Sometimes it's really hard to come up with 3 projects that cover everything. So if you want to add an additional project in section 3B, you can do so. Just give some context as to a bit of background on the project. And you don't have to use the same project to answer all 6 of the 3B questions. The questions in 3C are related to general knowledge, and these were added in partially because there's some things that we just didn't think might be covered in your project description, some general knowledge type things that might not be covered in the project description or might not come up in the case study or assessment center. And so what we found at the assessment center last time is we were asking a lot of questions related to things that just hadn't been covered off in the application. So we added some additional questions into the application this time to make sure we're getting as much information up front so we can do a proper assessment at the beginning and don't have a lot of areas that haven't been addressed by the time we get to the assessment center. Next slide, Drew. So this is just a screenshot of Part 3B, and so it's 6 questions, all related to core competency 1, which is process planning and application, and it addresses 7 of the criteria out of core competency 1. So there's questions about situation assessment, like how did you conduct your situation assessment, and how did you design your approach based on your situation assessment. So the first question looks at criteria 1.2 and 1.3. We then go on to look at some challenges, and this question looks at criteria 1.7, which is identifying the need to modify a plan, and also looking at, how we might have to analyze and report the results and whether or not we got the right input to be able to do that. The other questions in this section look at how did you work with the sponsor to understand the input, how did you close the loop with stakeholders, how did you document your process, and how did you evaluate your process. So those are the additional questions related to your projects. Next slide, Drew. Thank you. So part 3, the last of the question section, is general knowledge questions. So this is some things that might not have come out in a project description, or questions related to additional evidence of some of the important skills. So there's 8 questions in this section, and we cover off 9 criteria, and it looks at criteria other than just the ones in section 1, the process planning part. It looks at event planning and implementation, which is competency 2. It looks at communication skills, which is competency 4. And it looks at people skills, which is competency 5. Our first 2 questions, as you'll see on the screen, relate to working with Indigenous communities. And a key point here is that you don't you may have some knowledge and understanding, you just haven't had an opportunity to apply it through the work you're doing. So we're
I'm sorry to interrupt, Gay. We had about a 5-second dropout there. Can you maybe back up a few squares and repeat what we might have missed?
Sure. Okay. So I was talking about the questions in part 3C, and that there are 8 questions that cover off 9 criteria, and these are some of the core competencies other than core competency 1, which is process planning. These look at the P2 event and implementation skills, which is competency 2, the communication skills, which is competency 4, and the people skills, which are competency 5. The first 2 questions, as you'll see on the screen, address working with Indigenous communities. And the key thing here is you don't have to have direct experience. You may not have had a project that required you to work with Indigenous communities, but you may have some general knowledge and understanding of what it takes to work with Indigenous people, and so this is an opportunity to cover off that area. Other questions in this section cover your approach to evaluation, how you might manage conflict, the need for neutral facilitation, understanding of participant information needs, understanding the need for diverse communications, communicating technical information in lay terms, and start on looking at your people skills. So those are the sorts of questions in Part 3C, and as I said before, they don't have to relate to a specific project, so it's an opportunity to expand and include other aspects of your experience. The last item in the section is your portfolio. This is Part 4. It's the final section, and it's really your chance to give us further evidence that you have all the core competencies, you meet the 31 skills, and it's about sort of giving you a chance to reinforce what you've been talking about earlier. So think about what you can provide to back up the project descriptions and your responses to the Part 3 questions. And so you can include examples of materials or plans or evaluations, reports, that sort of thing. You can have up to 10 links, and they can be documents, videos, audio files, graphics. For each example, really key here to help the assessors understand what they're looking for. So, you know, if you've got if you're linking a plan as an example, and the plan is 25 pages long, but you really only want the assessor to look at the objectives that are on page 6, then you need to point that out, because as much as we enjoy reading engagement plans, you know, after a while we can only read so many, and it extends the amount of time that it takes for the assessors if we're not sure what we're looking for in an attachment. So for each example, indicate the core competency and criteria that the example provides evidence of. And if the link is multiple pages, as I said, let us know which page for which criteria, and provide a description of the portfolio item and how it provides evidence of the criteria. So there's 10 little boxes at the end of the application for you to provide some information and the link to your portfolio pieces. And I'm going to turn it over to Brenda now.
Okay, so on our next slide, this is where we're at in terms of the fees related to this process. So to have your application reviewed, you've got a $250 non-refundable fee that will be, you know, due on submission of your application. Then the actual assessment fee is $2,250, which is non-refundable, and that'll be, you know, invoiced upon invitation to the assessment center and would be due 1 week prior. So you can pay online or via PayPal. What our goal as assessors is that we will look at your application fee, look at your application in great detail, and as Gay said, 20 of the 31 criteria can be assessed in the application, and at that point, after this $250, then we'll invite you to move on in the process, and then we will be looking at the bigger non-refundable fee. So the next slide will give you all of the key dates. So we opened applications February 14th. You must have your application in by March 16th. We will be notifying you on April 6th if you will be moving ahead in the process. And along with that notification, we will give you a case study. And so your step 2 is going to be to develop that case study, and the case study will be due on May the 6th. So the case study is going to be as realistic as possible, and the expectation being that you would develop a full engagement plan and submit that to us for assessment. So case study is due on May the 6th, and then we have the assessment center scheduled for June the 16th and 17th. And we will, you know, commit to getting back to you by July 8th with all of the detailed feedback from your assessment. Questions? Nobody has any questions, Drew?
Yeah, so far I'm not seeing anybody with any questions, any hand up, or the... Let me just remind you that if you would like to ask a question verbally through your microphone, just click that little yellow hand icon, and I will open up your microphone there. Otherwise, type your question into the question box. And so, Gay and Brenda, waiting with breath bated for your questions to come in.
No, I just want to add that we are really, really excited to have so many people on the webinar that are considering moving ahead with this certification process. And we really believe very strongly that this is just such an important step forward in our profession. You know, that we move to some really solid validation of the skills, the knowledge that we need to do this kind of work. I came through the federal government system, and whenever I was, you know, encouraged to get new staff, it was always, oh, well, you know, get Susie to help you because she's a nice, friendly girl and she could do this kind of work. So I think we're clearly on an uphill battle to prove to people just how involved this work is, how wide a breadth of knowledge and skills we need to do it and to do it well. And we are, as I said, just really excited to move the program forward and to raise the profile of P2 practitioners. No questions, Drew?
It looks like we are devoid of questions.
Awesome. Well, you do have the options of sending in a question by email after this. Drew has recorded this, so you can encourage other friends and colleagues to watch it. I think, Drew, we actually have the original one that I did last year as well in the archives. So,
we do. It's still on the website, yeah.
Yeah, so if you want to go and consider that as you move forward, and as I said, really encouraging your colleagues to have a look at this as well. And we hope to see the applications rolling in. And Drew, they could also leave a question at info@IAP2Canada, correct?
That's correct.
Email?
info@iap2canada.ca, and we'll be happy to address the questions or pass them on to you.
Okay. Well, I think we're done, Drew.
All right. Gay, Brenda, thank you very much. Thank you to all of you who attended, and we look forward to seeing the applications pouring in.
Bye-bye, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone. Good day.